Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tuning to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we talk everything fantasy, give you advice for the week, who to start, who to sit, who to pick off the waiver wire, who to drop. And we're going to start today's show recapping that epic Thursday Night Football showdown last night between Blaine Gabbert and Drew Stanton. Did you have any of these guys on your fantasy team last night? I
did not have any of these people. Well, I did have one player, but it was, I was hoping, maybe Michael Floyd does things. Michael Floyd did nothing for me.
He didn't do anything.
I hate him so much. He did nothing for me. But I did, unfortunately, have David Johnson who helped out. But if you started Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert in your fantasy teams, either you are a terrible, terrible drafter, or you play in like a 25-team league and you just have to get people when you can.
25.
I mean, why else would you start Blaine Gabbert? Why? Who does that? Let's say it's like a 12 or 13 team. There's many other quarterbacks you can go to. I can literally name 13 quarterbacks you would name before him right off the top of my head. You don't actually need to do that at all.
Even in two quarterback leagues, Blaine Gabbert is not an option. Even though Blaine Gabbert got 20 points last night, but I don't know. I think that's pretty relevant. But to me, I think it was more like David Johnson versus Carlos Hyde last night. And Carlos Hyde even put on the solid performance. He had 78 yards and a touchdown.
Right.
That's double-digit day right there. And David Johnson has the most rushing yards in the game by a running back this year at 157.
Right.
The second most was Devontae Freeman a couple weeks ago against the Saints. But looking forward to the running backs going against this 49ers team,
mm-hmm.
I think if you have any running back going against the 49ers, they are for sure start. I don't even care who you are. Remember, the 49ers have allowed a 100-yard rusher past 4 games. That's Fozzie Whitaker. Fozzie Whitaker he came in on as a reserve. Christine Michael.
Right.
And then last week as well, I forgot who the Niners played last week all of a sudden.
Cowboys.
Ezekiel Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
And they have David Johnson. So 4 straight 100-yard rushers.
And now you got LaShawn McCoy coming next week, so you assume he's going to get 100 yards.
I think he might get 200.
You got over 150 with David Johnson, and now you're going to go, in Tampa Bay, you got, the situation there with the running back. Maybe it's Chris Sims. He's done okay recently, but, you got to assume the 100-yard things keep it up. You got to assume that when the San Francisco 49ers are playing, whoever the other team is, you start them. You start the running back, you start the quarterback, assuming it's not a backup like Drew Stanton. You start the wide receiver, all of them. You just if you have them, you play them. Doesn't matter who it is.
But other performers on both of these teams, Jeremy Curley actually performed well last night. So he had 102 yards and a touchdown. I think he's someone that you kind of have to start keeping your eye on now. I know he's on the 49ers. They are probably the most pathetic offense in all of football.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this countless times on the football show. Even on a fantasy show, they're still kind of pathetic. But Jeremy Curley is the only been a consistent receiver for the Niners this season. He's the only one that can get open. And I think even if they happen to make a change at quarterback in San Francisco,
mm-hmm.
I think that might actually boost Curley's fantasy value. Because Colin Kaepernick is in my opinion, he's the more talented quarterback, even though he might not be as good as he was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So I do think that might increase Curley's value, and he's going to be a boomer bust option, I think, weekly because of how bad this offense is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's somebody you guys start keeping your eye on. I think he is.
Yeah, he's somebody, that you probably should keep your eye on just because over the last he's had 3 of the last 5 weeks. He's had good games. Like he said, 300 yards total, but he had 61 yards, which isn't terrible, 88 yards and a touch 2 weeks ago, 102 and a touch last week. He's been somebody who Blaine Gabbert's been relying on. Once Kaepernick comes, maybe you think he relies a little bit more on like Selleck, maybe the tight end. Maybe they do a little bit more read option stuff like that. But yeah, so far, Curley, he's been as consistent as you could ask for anybody outside in the 49ers staff. Yeah,
and David Johnson, we touched on him already, but Larry Fitzgerald had a really good fantasy day last night.
Which makes sense. It's basically just, Drew Stanton being like, okay, I have these 2 options. I can give the ball to David Johnson, who's very capable, and I can throw the little slant passes to Larry Fitzgerald to get me a bunch of chunky yards because the longest he had was 29 yards. It wasn't like he was bombing it down the field for him. It's one of those things where I have these 2 options. I have Fitzgerald, who's as consistent as anybody's been over the last decade, and I have David Johnson, who has, had a couple of bad weeks, but he's somebody who, if relied upon, and if you're going against the bad San Francisco 49ers defense, he can absolutely get you the yards needed to, slow the game down and not have you do too much because you don't want Stanton to be relied on too heavily because that's when bad things happen. You throw interceptions, you fumble the ball. So he understood the game plan. Let's just give the ball to him. Let's throw the ball to Fitzgerald. Let's get out of here. Cool. Awesome. Win.
And I want to touch on the Niners schedule here. We did say that they allow 4 straight 100-yard rushers.
Right.
So looking ahead to the teams that they're going to play, they're playing Buffalo week 6. So they're going to face LaShawn McCoy. So LaShawn McCoy is going to have a huge fantasy day, in my opinion.
Right.
Then for week 7, they're going against possibly Doug Martin and Charles Sims.
Right.
It doesn't matter who starts for the Bucs. They're probably 100 yards again. And then they have a bye week.
Right.
And then after that, they're going to play New Orleans in week 9. So Mark Ingram is going to have a huge fantasy day. They're going to play David Johnson again. And then 11 against LeGarrette Blount. And Dion Lewis will probably be back for that game by then. So that'd probably be a huge boost for Dion Lewis owners if you don't have him on your roster already, who I think is a perfect stash at this point. And then they're going to go against Miami. We don't know who that backfield is, but I'm pretty assuming we're going to have a clear-cut starter by then. So whoever starts for that Miami Dolphins offense, fire him away. And then they're going to go against Jordan Howard, who I think is going to stay as the top running back there in Chicago week 13. And then they're going against Matt Forte, but I think Bilal Powell might happen to get more touches by that point.
Yeah.
Whoever is a starter running back for the New York Jets at week 14, fire him away. And then they're going to play Devontae Freeman in a playoff week against Atlanta. And then for possibly championship week, they're going to play against Todd Gurley. So if you're pretty much, the schedules are pretty much brutal for the 49ers defense against running backs. So that's all I got to say. Looking forward, this is the running backs they're going to play.
Basically, yeah, you would assume whoever the running backs are, if you're playing against them, maybe you have a little bit of hesitation with some of them because maybe Sims isn't going to do as much, whether it's him or Martin. You assume, maybe they don't get 100 yards. And then maybe if the Patriots are back by that point, maybe if Dion Lewis and LeGarrette Blount will kind of switch carries, kind of share the ball like that. But outside of that, I mean, you look at this, you assume if it's either you assume Jones with the Jets, Freeman or Coleman, whoever with Atlanta, they're going to do good. You get David Johnson again, you get Mark Ingram, you get LaShawn McCoy. A lot of the weeks they're playing, they're going to probably give up, if not 100, really close to 100 yards.
Yeah. But I think the only thing we can agree on this from this game last night is that Blaine Gabbert should not be on any fantasy team.
No.
But if Colin Kaepernick happens to be the starter, I still don't think he's a viable fantasy option at any point at all. Remember, he is not the same guy as 2 years ago.
Because if you want to start him, let's say they start him, next week against the Bills. You're starting him against Marcel Darius. You're starting him against Rex Ryan's defense. You're starting him against Stephon Gilmore. You're starting him against people who are very capable of taking away what Colin Kaepernick is able to do, right? He's a running quarterback and stuff like that, but you're throwing him to a defense that Rex Ryan has gotten on track. And he did this without Marcel Darius. Marcel Darius is one of the best defensive players in the NFL. I wouldn't, like we talked about this before, like I wouldn't necessarily start him, against the Bills. But even if he does, I wouldn't have any faith in Kaepernick.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have any faith in Kaepernick here. But the one thing I want to point out is that Blaine Gabbert has 70 yards rushing last night. So I think Kaepernick can possibly
he can do those same things, yeah.
He could possibly put up better rushing numbers. So it's just something I would keep my eye on. But we're going to take our first break here at the Fantasy Football Podcast, and we're going to be talking about the Raiders' backfield.
Yep.
It's all over the place now.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about the Eagles' offense and what you should do with them in fantasy. So we'll be right back here at the Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. So now we're going to transition a little bit as far as we're going to go to the Oakland Raiders. The running back situation that they have right now is a little bit up in the air. Before, now you had Latavius Murray, who you kind of, if you had him in the fantasy league, you would start him. He'd been doing solidly well enough, not, what you would hope for, but he got a touchdown the first 3 weeks of the season, so that at least helped out the cause if he had 37 yards against the Tennessee Titans in week 3, but he got you a touchdown. He got you some points, right? Week 1, 59 and a touch. Week 2, 57 and a touch. Slowly, he's gotten a little bit worse. Now it looks like he's going to be out. He's questionable. He's got the turf toe situation. So now you kind of look at the other running backs that they have on the team, right? So you have DeAndre Washington, and you also have Jalen Richard, Richard had that 75-yard run in week 1 against New Orleans. But outside of that, hasn't had more than 28 yards rushing for an entire game. So it's one of those things where you either want to start him, do you want to start DeAndre Washington, who has been okay, 46 yards against the Falcons and 57 yards against the Titans. Both of them have been okay. So I would be hesitant to start either one of them just because you don't know which one it's going to be. You don't know necessarily who's going to be the one that's going to be the workhorse running back. Maybe we hear a little bit more as the week goes on. Maybe Sunday morning, really early Sunday morning we hear about it, maybe Saturday night. But as of right now, I'd say maybe it would be DeAndre Washington just because he's been a little bit more stable the first 4 weeks. But assuming it's not going to be Murray, assuming Murray's out, which it looks like he is going to be, I would be hesitant to start either one of them.
I would say maybe start DeAndre Washington because of the matchup. And previously last week, the Raiders did say that they want to get DeAndre Washington involved more.
Right.
Even though Murray was still pretty much the lead dog there. But with Murray possibly missing this game this Sunday against the Chargers, which is probably more likely to happen, this is a perfect opportunity for DeAndre Washington to solidify his role in the Raiders' backfield because Murray, he wasn't playing lights out. Even dating back to last season, he wasn't playing lights out either. He was just playing solid enough. But Murray, he did score 3 touchdowns in the first 3 weeks.
Right.
Okay, but his highest total is 59 yards in week 1 against the Saints defense.
Right.
That was a Saints defense that he struggled to, get going against. But DeAndre Washington and Jalen Richard, they're so similar. They even have the same body type. They're both 200 pounds, over 200 pounds that is, and 5'8". But these numbers for Washington and Richard, they're both similar because Washington has 147 rushing yards in a year. Richard has 144. Richard has a touchdown on the ground, and Washington has no touchdowns on the ground at all. Even their receiving numbers are similar. Richard has 39 compared to Washington's 37. So it is kind of a rocky backfield to look forward to but I do think Washington is a guy to go with this week, and I think he's someone that you can possibly start, especially for people on the bye week. For if you have Mark Ingram on the bye week, for example, I think it's a perfect opportunity for DeAndre Washington to start on your fantasy team.
The one thing that you can say is they're playing the San Diego Chargers, who, we've seen in the past hasn't been the best as far as their defense goes. They've given up 33 to the Chiefs. They've given up 26 to the Colts, and they've given up 35 to the Saints. Their defense is shaky. You lose people like Manti Te'o. You lose, just that offensively, they've lost Keenan Allen. They lost Danny Woodhead. They've lost people who have helped them throughout the year. They've given up 100 yards. They've given up a bunch of rushes to whether it be Ware in Kansas City. They had a game against the Indianapolis Colts. They had what is it right here? And against that's against the Kansas City Chiefs. So when they played the Indianapolis Colts in Week 3, they had Frank Gore, not exactly the youngest running back in the league, gave up 82 yards and a touchdown. So you can see somebody coming in there and getting, like I said, not 100 yards, but maybe like 70 yards and a touchdown, something like that, because like I said, Latavius Murray has gotten a touchdown in each of the first 3 weeks. I would lean with you with Washington. I would just be hesitant. It'd be one of those things of just like, if you have another running back slot available and you need somebody, maybe pick up Washington. I would just be a little bit hesitant because we're not 100% sure who's going to get the bulk of the carries.
Yeah, and Washington is a for sure flex start for me, but I think if you really have running backs on a bye, like for example, I said more like Mark Ingram,
right?
Then I say maybe go ahead and start him if you really don't have anybody else. But I do think DeAndre Washington is the back to go with in the Raiders backfield this Sunday. But moving on to another team in the NFC East here, the Philadelphia Eagles have some pretty good fantasy performance this year, and we got Zach Ertz, the tight end, coming back. And, of course, we got Carson Wentz. So I expect a huge fantasy game for both of these players. Even Jordan Matthews has played well this season as the number 1 receiver in that Eagles offense, and it helps that Carson Wentz is playing good. But Zach Ertz did get hurt week 1, and he's coming back this week against the Detroit Lions team, who have a terrible time, or tough time for that matter, covering tight ends. And this is a for sure game you have to start Zach Ertz. And I think, honestly, maybe you can possibly start Carson Wentz in this game. He is a borderline weekly starter, I think, from here on out with the matchups that he has for the next 2 weeks.
Right. You look at it coming up, he's got the Rams and the Redskins. Both of those teams aren't exactly somebody that you would kind of, assume would have good defenses that he would struggle against. But you look at the Detroit Lions, the worst technically passing yards they've had against him was Aaron Rodgers, who had 205 yards. But he did have 4 touchdowns. The week before that against Tennessee Titans, Marcus Mariota didn't do 100 or 300 yards passing, but he had 238 and 2 touchdowns. Then he had Andrew Luck, who destroyed him in week 1. And even when you play the Chicago Bears team that you didn't assume would be that good, still gave up 300 yards and 2 touchdowns to Brian Hoyer. So it was something, when you are Carson Wentz, somebody who, could have a strong game, somebody who could give up a lot of points because they, their defense hasn't been as strong. You gave up 35 and 34, but I can see the Detroit Lions, Matthew Stafford, playing better than we thought he would without Calvin Johnson. Maybe that's because you don't look at one guy. It's kind of the thing with Andy Dalton or with Matt Ryan, where it's just like you have that one wide receiver who you always look at. Now he kind of has to look all around the field to see other players. He's been okay, but if you have Carson Wentz, absolutely start him against a bad defense in Detroit.
Yes, but and I said this on Tuesday. If you guys have Carson Palmer on your team who has been kind of disappointed up to this point, and we kind of assumed that he wasn't going to play.
Right.
So I said Carson Wentz was the perfect pickup this week for those that need quarterback help. I'm a Carson Palmer owner, but I didn't have the problem because I have Derek Carr as my backup. So
that's a solid one to have.
I have to go with him from here on out. But I can't drop Palmer because he's in a pretty good offense still.
And when he gets back, he's as soon as he gets back, he's going to have John Brown, he's going to have Fitzgerald, he's going to have Floyd, he's going to have these guys to throw to. So yeah.
But anyways, I think Carson Wentz is someone you need to start this week if you have him. And for you guys that absolutely need quarterback help or have a quarterback on a bye, like Drew Brees, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even someone like Blake Bortles, who gets good fantasy yards, even though he may not be the good a quarterback, he gets you those garbage yards. So, yeah, if you have someone who you're wondering, should I start him, should I not? If you got Carson Wentz, yeah, against the bad Lions defense, yeah, absolutely.
And if he's available in your league still, you need to pick him up right now.
100%.
Yeah. I don't care what quarterback you have. I'm kidding. I don't know about that. But Zach Ertz, I expect him to have a good game as well. Mm-hmm. And I think he's going to be more involved, especially with, the way Carson Wentz is playing. And it does maybe worry me that Jordan Matthews is going to lose a couple of targets. But if Ertz can get you touchdowns because he has that huge body. So I expect a really good performance for the Eagles skill players this week. But we're going to take our second break, Anthony, and we're going to give the people what they want. We're going to give them advice who to start and who to sit this week.
Okay.
We're going to give the people what they want, and we'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And now is the segment you guys have been waiting for all week, and it's time for Stardom and Sit-em, guys. So we're going to start with guys that you can possibly or should sit this week for that matter. So you got two guys you got your eye on. I got two guys I have my eye on who should start. So what are your candidates to sit this week?
All right, so you're going to be positive. I'm going to be negative for this whole thing. So the first one I'm going to say sit is Andrew Luck. And I understand that Andrew Luck is a very good quarterback in this league, and I understand that he even gets good garbage time numbers in this league, right? With 1,100 passing yards and 8 touchdowns already throughout the year, that's a pretty good start to the season. And I understand they're playing the Bears. All of those things I fully understand. Here's the one problem. Last week, the Colts played the Jaguars in England because they did that whole thing where the Jaguars basically go to their second home in England. They invited the Colts out there. They lost. But they didn't do, every time before this where they've had games in England, both teams have a bye week the week afterwards just to kind of get their body back, to rest a little bit, to get acclimated with the whole, coming back to the States thing. But they decided, no, we're going to do the bye in week 10 like every other team would, just have it a random week. So they're going to be playing. Maybe they're not used to everything else like that. Maybe their body's not acclimated back to being back in the States. You're playing a Bears defense, which I understand the Bears defense isn't that good. But I would say I wouldn't trust Andrew Luck because he's had a little bit of struggles this year regardless. Team around him, T.Y. Hilton is very good, but the rest of the team around him isn't that good. Frank Gore is 97 years old. He hasn't been the same thing he used to be in San Francisco. Luck struggled against Denver's defense. I understand it's Denver, but he had 197 yards. Had 234 yards last week against Jacksonville's defense. I would be hesitant with Andrew Luck. If you have a better quarterback on your roster, I would start them above Andrew Luck. With the, jet lag, I guess you would say, of coming back and forth like that, I would sit Andrew Luck.
Wow. You would sit Andrew Luck.
I understand. I'm just saying not having a bye week and just not having a normal week like you're used to may screw him up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the Colts didn't have a bye week after that London game. I'm surprised by that. They usually do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of weird.
They,
I don't know why.
They really got shafted by the schedule there. But you have one more.
Well, they told the Colts basically said we don't want a bye week. They were the ones that told the NFL before the calendar came out, we don't want to do that, and they're like, okay.
Hey.
They're like, all right, you do what you want.
All right. Well, we get into your final sit of the week, and that is.
Okay, so we're going. Okay, so the next sit of the week, this is a little bit more. If you look at it on the surface, you understand a little bit more. So we have the Atlanta Falcons playing the Denver Broncos, and I understand what happened last week with Atlanta. They were very good. 300 yards for Julio Jones, 500 yards for Matt Ryan. Those things don't generally keep up every week, So I would assume that this week when they play each other, you're going to have a Denver defense. Von Miller is a freak of nature. Aqib Talib, whatever he does in the offseason, that's his business. on the field, really, really good. I would be very hesitant to think that they're going to do the same thing that they're going to do next week, because as good as Julio Jones looked that week, 300 yards, he only has 488 on the season. So he only had 188 yards the 3 weeks before that. So he hasn't been anything stellar in the 3 weeks before that. So I think he comes back down to earth. And when I say comes back down to earth, I mean under 100 yards, so way, way back down to earth. And even Matt Ryan with his 1,473 yards, that, you minus 500 of that, he's under 1,000 yards for the first 3 weeks. It's been okay, but it hasn't been anything too fantastic. I would just be very hesitant with, I'm going to cheat and do both of them. More Matt Ryan or more Julio Jones than Matt Ryan, because maybe at a certain point the Broncos are up, say like 28-7, and he just has to throw the ball. But the more lock of a sit, I would say, is Julio Jones, and Matt Ryan just not being as good as he was last week, maybe like 250 this week, but nowhere near, I would say, even 350 yards.
Yeah, I can't trust Matt Ryan, Julio Jones against this Broncos defense. They're playing probably top cornerbacks in Aqib Talib and Chris Harris.
Right.
And at this point of the season, the Falcons look like the best offense in football. Mm-hmm. But they're playing practically the best defense in all of football right now. And I just can't see Matt Ryan keeping up this pace that he's on, especially with an elite defense. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to really find out a lot about this Falcons team from a fantasy perspective. And I do think Matt Ryan and Julio Jones are going to come back to earth a little bit, but I think Julio Jones is going to have a kind of a solid performance. I wouldn't sit Julio Jones in this game. I think he's one of those guys you just don't sit depending on the matchup. But I think he's going to get probably 80 yards and a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Matt Ryan will probably get at least 200, maybe 2 touchdowns. So that's a solid performance, but I don't think that's what the people want from Matt Ryan. So I think that's why he's a sit at this point. But now it's time to be positive.
Right.
And I'm going to stick to the quarterback thing here we have.
Okay.
And I think Derek Carr is probably the start of the week for quarterbacks.
Okay.
And he's going against a Chargers defense that pretty much
not the best.
It's not the best. And they've been plagued with injuries this far. And Carr has performed like an every week starter except for week 3 against the Tennessee Titans. Mm-hmm. He has at least, I think, 20 points, especially the first the week against New Orleans and last week against the Ravens. Mm-hmm. He did have a solid game in week 2 against the Falcons. So he's had really good numbers this far in the season. I do think he's going to finish as a top 5 quarterback. And we knew about this Raiders offense, how it was going to be really improved. So I think he is probably the start of the week in fantasy football.
Yeah, I can see him having a bounce back week, because he said last week only 199 yards passing, but he did have 4 touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens. That helps the math when you do that. Yeah, and against the San Diego Chargers, poor defense. Yeah, I like that. I like it. I think it's good.
Yeah, and the Chargers can't sack anybody. They're 21st in the league, so Carr's going to be in the pocket literally all day.
Right.
So I expect a huge day also from Michael Crabtree.
Sure.
And I think Amari Cooper's going to get back on track in this game.
Okay.
And like I talked about DeAndre Washington earlier, I think he's going to have really good receiving numbers as well. So that is my start of the week.
Okay.
And I have a running back.
Okay.
I think I'm going to go with LeGarrette Blount. And I know they're playing the Browns, and then be like,
You're just saying that because of the Browns. You're just saying that because of the Browns, and you assume everybody on the Patriots is going to have a big game. You assume the punter's going to have a big game. Because it's
the kicker, Gostowski.
Yeah, actually not even the punter. They're not going to punt. Why did I say punter? Yeah, the kicker. Yeah, the kicker's going to have a good game. He's going to get like a 95-yard kick for whatever reason. It's because it's the Browns. So the wind, some angels in the outfield stuff will just fly. Yeah. Okay, but I like it. Keep going. LeGarrette Blount. All right, sorry.
Yeah, LeGarrette Blount, I think, is the start of the week as far as running backs concerned. We've seen what LeGarrette Blount can do when it's relied on him. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to have to rely on him this week. Tom Brady's coming back, who I think is a for sure start this week. That's why I think it was pretty obvious. That's why I didn't talk about him in this segment. But LeGarrette Blount, don't be afraid to start him, even when Tom Brady is coming back. Don't be afraid, because I think the fact that LeGarrette Blount has pretty much improved this season, and the running game has improved, that's a whole nother weapon that these Patriots offense has.
This will be the week where you kind of figure out if LeGarrette Blount will still be used, because it's been kind of a weird thing of the running back being used as much as they have. You probably do that a little bit because the other quarterbacks, be it Garoppolo or Brissett, you don't know what exactly they would be able to produce. Now with Brady, what Brady tends to do is not use the running backs like running backs. He tends to use like Edelman and Amendola as running backs, where he just does that little like short pass and that becomes a running game. So I would absolutely still start LeGarrette Blount, and if he can be starter quality this week, you keep him going for later on in the weeks.
Yeah. Even with Dion Lewis comes back, I still think LeGarrette Blount is a valuable fantasy player this year. But that does it for our show, and man, we have a lot of football ahead of us.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and I will be back on Tuesday all by myself because Anthony can't be here on Tuesdays.
I'll be back on Friday, week from today.
But he will be back on Friday.
I will be.
He will be back on Friday. So, yeah, we'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can catch the show on a variety of platforms such as iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud, as well as the network website, GSMCpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter. You can ask for some advice on that page, and that is at GSMC_FFootball. You can also go to the Instagram account. That is at GSMC_FFootball. And we have a Facebook page too, people. Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is the name of the page. Got any last words, Anthony?
No, I really hope that we are 100% correct on this whole thing. Good luck to Washington for our picks. Good luck to the Denver Broncos defense. Hopefully we come back and don't look like total fools. That would not be great. But, yeah, good show. Had a lot of fun. If you have a fantasy football team, you need any advice, hopefully this helped you out.
Yeah, hopefully. And hopefully we are not wrong.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say. We can be completely wrong about the Falcons and be like, oh, yeah. But anyways, we'll be back. Well, I will be back, that is, on Tuesday. And you guys, thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for listening. Really means a lot to me. Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.